Episode 5. The Wooden Stake Strategy. The genius of a master tactician. The first sunrise after the fall of Dai La spread a cold gray light across the wounded land like ashes left behind by war. Smoke drifted silently from burned rooftops beneath the damp morning sky, while soldiers repaired shattered walls and carried broken weapons through muddy streets. The sounds of hammers striking stone mixed with distant horse hooves and the cries of exhausted workers trying to rebuild what the nation had nearly lost. From the eastern watchtower of Dai La Fortress, Ngô Quyền stood silently beneath the cold wind, staring toward the rivers that flowed endlessly into the distant sea. His armor still carried the scars of battle. Below the fortress walls, destroyed siege engines and burned barricades remained scattered across the muddy earth stained with blood. Kiao Tsung Tien was dead. The traitor within had finally been erased. But inside Ngô Quyền mind, peace lasted only for a brief moment. Because he understood one terrible truth. The real war was still coming. Far to the north, the Southern Han Empire was preparing its revenge. Their massive naval fleet had already crossed the outer sea and was descending toward the rivers of Đại Việt, like a black storm swallowing the horizon. Thousands of enemy soldiers aboard enormous warships were coming to crush the fragile independence the Vietnamese people had defended with blood for generations. Dung Tam Ka climbed the watchtower steps quickly before bowing respectfully. "My lord, scouts from the eastern coast have returned. The Southern Han fleet is moving closer. They may enter our rivers at any moment." Ngô Quyền did not turn around. His eyes remained fixed upon the distant horizon where dark storm clouds stretched endlessly across the sea. "How many ships? We still cannot determine the exact number, but the fleet is enormous." Silence followed. Cold winds screamed through the war banners behind them. Dung Tam Ka clenched his fists tightly. "Allow me to lead the army and confront them directly at sea." Ngô Quyền slowly shook his head. No, the answer was calm. "Absolute. If we fight them openly at sea, we lose." Dung Tam Ka lowered his eyes because he knew it was true. The Southern Han Navy dominated open water warfare. Their giant warships towered above smaller Vietnamese vessels. A direct confrontation would become slaughter. But if they avoided battle, how could they possibly stop the invading fleet before it reached the heart of the country? Then suddenly, Ngô Quyền spoke again. "Have you ever traveled through the Bạch Đằng River?" Dung Tam Ka nodded slowly. "Yes, many years ago." Ngô Quyền gaze narrowed slightly. "That river will become the graveyard of the entire Southern Han fleet." The generals standing nearby exchanged stunned glances. "A river? How could a single river destroy the greatest navy in the north?" But Ngô Quyền explained nothing further. Instead, he simply looked eastward where weak sunlight pierced through the storm clouds. "Prepare the horses. We ride for Bạch Đằng." That same afternoon, a cavalry force departed from Dai La and rode toward the northeastern river mouth beneath darkening skies. Endless flooded forests stretched across both sides of the muddy roads while cold winds carried the smell of salt water from the distant coast. Ngô Quyền rode at the front of the column in silence. Inside his mind, only one image remained: the tides of the Bạch Đằng River. He had traveled through those waterways many times during his youth. He understood the twisting channels, the hidden mudflats, and the violent tidal changes better than anyone alive. Slowly, the landscape formed inside his thoughts like a gigantic battlefield created by nature itself. By sunset, the cavalry finally reached the riverbanks. The waters of Bạch Đằng surged beneath a crimson sky while ocean winds swept across the endless marshlands. Ngô Quyền dismounted quietly and walked toward the edge of the river. The generals followed behind him in silence. He bent down, picked up a floating branch trapped in the mud, and tossed it into the rushing current. Everyone watched carefully as the branch vanished almost instantly into the violent tide. Ngô Quyền stared at the river for a long time. Then he finally spoke. "Do you see it?" The generals remained confused. Dung Tam Ka stepped closer. "What does my lord mean?" Ngô Quyền pointed toward the water. "The tide. The water rises quickly here, but when it retreats, it becomes even more dangerous." Using the tip of his sword, he slowly began drawing lines across the wet mud. "If the Southern Han fleet sails deep into this river during high tide," his sword stopped in the center of the muddy map, "they will never escape when the waters fall." Silence spread across the shoreline. Then suddenly, realization began appearing in the eyes of the generals. Ngô Quyền continued drawing across the mud. I do not need to defeat them at sea. He slowly lifted his head toward the dark river. I will turn this river itself into a weapon. The next morning, thousands of workers and soldiers spread across the Bạch Đằng River system beneath heavy storm clouds. Teams of men waded waist-deep through muddy water while guiding enormous sharpened wooden stakes into hidden positions along the riverbed. Thick ropes strained under tension as iron-tipped spikes disappeared beneath the dark tidal currents. Ngô Quyền stood aboard a small riverboat directing every placement carefully. The work was exhausting. Giant wooden mallets slammed repeatedly against the tops of the stakes while muddy water exploded upward with every impact. Hundreds of sharpened pillars slowly sank deeper into the river floor. Row after row, line after line, an invisible trap began growing beneath the waters of Bạch Đằng. Jung Tam Ka rowed along the shoreline supervising the hidden defenses while swamp forests surrounded the riverbanks like walls of darkness. Soldiers camouflaged the deadly stake fields beneath floating branches, mud, and river weeds while the tide slowly rose again. Soon the water completely swallowed the hidden weapons. Nothing remained visible. The river appeared calm once more. But beneath the surface, death waited silently. As evening winds swept across the darkening waters, Ngô Quyền watched the final rows of stakes disappear beneath the returning tide. Campfires soon glowed beside the riverbanks while soldiers continued sharpening swords and spears beneath the storm-filled sky. Blacksmiths worked through the night beside roaring furnaces while sparks illuminated exhausted faces. Nearby, warriors silently wrapped leather grips around spears beneath flickering torchlight. Everyone understood what was coming. War. Late that night, Ngô Quyền walked alone beside the moonlit river while studying the changing currents and hidden tides. Above him, silver moonlight reflected across calm water concealing thousands of deadly stakes beneath the surface. The river looked peaceful, but soon it would become a battlefield unlike anything the Southern Han had ever seen. Suddenly, distant hoofbeats echoed through the darkness. Scouts arrived breathlessly at the riverside camp carrying urgent news. The Southern Han fleet is advancing closer through the coastal waters. Inside the command tent, Jung Tam Ka quickly unrolled soaked coastal maps before Ngô Quyền. Candlelight flickered across marked enemy positions spread through sea and river routes, while thunder shook the canvas overhead. The Southern Han fleet was approaching exactly as predicted. Generals gathered around Ngô Quyền discussing tides, river depths, and enemy movement patterns while rain battered the camp outside. Finally, Ngô Quyền gave the order. Prepare the ambush positions. Immediately, thousands of Vietnamese archers moved silently into the dense forests lining both sides of the river. Soldiers concealed themselves among swamp trees and tall river grass, while small war boats disappeared beneath overhanging branches inside narrow hidden waterways. Every movement remained silent. Every soldier waited. Morning fog spread across the enormous Bạch Đằng River system, while dark clouds covered the sky. Then the enemy arrived. Far beyond the river mouth, giant Southern Han warships crashed through rough ocean waves beneath dragon banners snapping violently in the wind. Massive armored vessels pushed forward through the storm, while war drums thundered across the fleet. At the front of the flagship stood the Southern Han commander, proud and confident beneath the dark sky. Rows of enemy soldiers prepared bows and long spears while believing victory was already certain. By high tide, the fleet entered the mouth of Bạch Đằng River. Hidden, Vietnamese scouts watched silently from the swamp forests along the coastline, while messenger riders rushed through muddy trails to deliver news to Ngô Quyền. The enemy fleet has entered the river exactly as predicted. Ngô Quyền listened calmly. Then a faint smile appeared across his face. The trap had begun. The Southern Han fleet sailed deeper into Bạch Đằng, while rising tides lifted the giant warships safely above the hidden stake fields. Enemy soldiers laughed confidently aboard their ships, believing the river passage was clear. They never realized death waited beneath the water below them. Hidden inside the riverside forests, Vietnamese warriors remained perfectly motionless while enemy ships passed nearby. Archers watched silently through layers of leaves and fog while the fleet advanced deeper into narrowing waterways surrounded by dense swamps. Then slowly, the tide began to change. Ngô Quyền stood quietly beside the hidden army, while watching the river currents shift direction. The water level began falling. At first, the Southern Han sailors noticed nothing unusual, but soon their rowers struggled against increasing resistance. Enemy commanders started exchanging nervous glances as muddy riverbanks slowly emerged beside the fleet. Then someone shouted. Wooden spikes were appearing behind the ships. Panic spread instantly. Before the fleet could react, one massive warship slammed violently into the hidden stakes. The impact shattered wood across the river while iron-tipped spikes pierced directly through the ship's hull. Chaos exploded. More ships collided with hidden stakes beneath the retreating tide. Enemy soldiers crashed across tilting decks while trapped vessels smashed into one another in shallow waters. The Southern Han commander stared in horror as dozens of warships became immobilized across the hidden stake field. Then Ngô Quyền raised his sword high from the riverbank. That was the signal. Thousands of hidden Vietnamese warriors erupted from the forests and swamp grass surrounding the river. A massive volley of flaming arrows launched through the dark sky toward the trapped enemy fleet. Fire consumed the ships instantly. Burning arrows crashed into sails, decks, and supply stores while flames spread rapidly across the immobilized vessels. Southern Han soldiers desperately tried extinguishing the inferno while their ships continued breaking apart on the hidden spikes. Then Vietnamese warboats surged out from hidden river branches. Dung Tam Ka led fast attack vessels directly toward the enemy command ships, while warriors boarded burning decks beneath clouds of smoke and fire. Hand-to-hand combat erupted across the collapsing fleet. Steel clashed beside raging flames while enemy ships tilted helplessly against the exposed stakes. Soldiers leaped into muddy waters attempting escape, only to drown beneath armor or become trapped among the spikes. The Southern Han commander desperately ordered retreat. But it was too late. The falling tide continued exposing more deadly stakes across the river, while Vietnamese forces surrounded the remaining ships from every direction. There was no escape. Massive fires consumed the fleet, while black smoke rose across the battlefield beneath storm-filled skies. Terrified enemy soldiers realized the horrifying truth. They had sailed directly into a trap designed by the river itself. Ngô Quyền stood proudly aboard a Vietnamese war boat, while flames illuminated the battlefield behind him. Around him, the Southern Han fleet collapsed into ruin. By sunset, the tide had fully retreated. Endless rows of sharpened stakes rose above the waters of Bạch Đằng like the teeth of a giant beast. Destroyed enemy warships lay shattered across the muddy river, while burning debris drifted slowly through the currents. The greatest naval fleet in the north had been annihilated. Victorious Vietnamese soldiers raised their weapons and shouted triumphantly from boats and riverbanks alike. Dung Tam Ka knelt respectfully before Ngô Quyền after the crushing victory. But Ngô Quyền himself remained silent. He looked across the devastated battlefield beneath the crimson sunset, without celebration in his eyes. Only reflection. Only understanding. The cost of freedom had once again been paid with blood. As darkness slowly approached, soldiers helped wounded comrades along muddy riverbanks, while smoke drifted quietly into the evening sky. Later that night, Ngô Quyền stood alone beside the peaceful river while cold winds moved his battle cloak gently in the darkness. The waters of Bạch Đằng had become calm once more. Beneath the surface, the hidden stakes still rested silently below the tide. And above the river, the first peaceful sunrise of a new era slowly began rising over Đại Việt.